Hey guys, tonight we dive into the world of Japanese history, so before you get comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. So, kick back and relax as we immerse into this magical journey together. So with that being said, let's go.
In the waning years of the Heian period, when Kyoto's noble houses still echoed with the soft cadence of court poetry and the distant cry of nightingales, a boy named Haruto was born into the modest yet resolute Sigusa clan. Their estate sat at the edge of the capital, where wild groves met cultivated gardens, and samurai walked in quiet step with the shadows of their ancestors. The Sigusa were not mighty like the Minamoto, nor revered like the Taira, but they were men of principle. Their blades bore no unnecessary blood, and their hearts bowed neither to glory nor greed. At the center of their tradition stood Sigusa Masanori, Haruto's father, a warrior of quiet renown whose body carried the marks of distant skirmishes and whose eyes bore the clarity of a man well acquainted with death. When Haruto turned 5, the boy was still unsteady on his feet, more fascinated by beetles than by blades. Yet Masanori began his tutelage not with sword or bow, but with words. At dusk, as fireflies danced like wandering spirits across the garden, Masanori would sit with Haruto beneath the blooming branches of the cherry tree his grandfather had planted. The petals fell in slow drifts around them, like snow that had lost its chill. "Tell me, Haruto," Masanori said one evening, as the last sliver of sunlight bathed the yard in amber light. "What do you think lies beyond the blossom's fall?" Haruto tilted his head. "The ground?" Masanori gave a soft chuckle, calloused fingers gently brushing a fallen petal from the boy's shoulder. "Yes. But deeper than that. A samurai must learn to see what is hidden from the eye. The falling blossom is not simply falling, it is returning to where it began. To the earth. To death." The boy frowned. "Why talk about dying?" "Because it is the most honest thing in this world," Masanori said. "Death is not an enemy. It is a companion. A reminder. It sharpens the mind. It purifies the heart. You must carry it with you, not to fear it, but to walk beside it." Haruto did not yet understand, but the words took root in him like seeds in tilled soil. Days passed, then seasons. At age 6, Haruto watched as his father performed rituals before the family kamidana, the household shrine. He saw him leave offerings for fallen comrades, speak to ancestors as though they were still walking among them. Death, to Masanori, was neither haunting nor final, it was ever present, like the breeze between leaves, or the silence before a storm. When Haruto asked why his father never feared it, Masanori answered without hesitation. "Because I have already made peace with it. A man who accepts his death cannot be moved by fear. Only he can truly live." These words struck the boy deeply, though he still clung to his childlike notions of safety. But something in the way his father spoke, quiet, reverent, and unshaken, left an impression. On his 7th birthday, Masanori gave Haruto a small wooden bakken, hand-carved with dragonflies etched into the hilt. "Not to kill," he said, pressing the handle into the boy's hands. "But to remember. Each swing must carry meaning. Not because of what it might destroy, but because of what it must protect." Haruto practiced each day under the old cedar tree behind their home. At first, his strikes were clumsy. He tripped over roots and dropped his sword more than once. But Masanori never scolded. Instead, he watched silently, correcting only when necessary. One rainy afternoon, Haruto burst into tears after slipping in the mud. His bakken clattered on the stones, and he lay there, soaked and trembling. Masanori approached, kneeling beside him. "Why do you cry?" "I failed," Haruto said. "I'm not strong. I'll never be like you." Masanori placed a hand on his shoulder. falling is not failure. Forgetting to rise again, that is. But, what if I die before I can rise? You already carry death with you, my son, Masanori said gently. But that means you also carry the strength to stand. The boy blinked at him through tears. I don't understand. You will. One day. That night, Haruto dreamed of a road made of ashes, where warriors walked with blades drawn, each one flanked by a shadow. As he stepped onto the path, he felt something heavy settle on his back, but he did not stumble. In his dream, he walked onward, into the fog. By the time Haruto turned 10, the scent of steel and sweat had become more familiar than plum blossoms. The cherry tree in the Sigusa courtyard still bloomed every spring, but Haruto no longer sat idly beneath it. Now he stood with his feet firm, Bakken gripped tight in both hands, repeating kata until the moon climbed high over the rooftops. His father, ever watchful but sparing in words, had sent him to train under a man known only as Kojiro. Once a retainer of a high-ranking Kyoto lord, Kojiro had survived the burning of his master's estate and the betrayal of his comrades. He now lived in seclusion, teaching only a few chosen boys, the sons of samurai who valued spirit over title. Haruto's first visit to Kojiro's dojo was humbling. The building was plain, wooden floors worn to a polish, a single incense burner in the corner, and walls that bore no banners, only scratch marks from years of relentless training. Kojiro stood barefoot at the center, a slender man with a long scar running down the left side of his face. His eyes were gray like weathered stone, steady, unimpressed, and impossibly still. You are Masanori's son? Kojiro asked, studying the boy with a glance that pierced deeper than any blade. Haruto bowed low. Yes, sensei. Then you already carry death. But do you carry silence? The boy looked up, confused. Kojiro didn't explain. Instead, he pointed to the center of the floor. Strike. Haruto moved without thought. He swung his Bakken in the form he had practiced dozens of times. Kojiro did not block. He merely stepped aside with the grace of falling snow. Haruto's strike missed entirely, leaving him off balance. Kojiro's voice was calm. You are loud inside. You think of winning. You think of impressing. You think of your father watching. All noise. Come back when your mind is quiet. The rejection stung. Haruto returned home silent and downcast. But Masanori said nothing, only handed him a wet cloth and gestured toward the stone basin in the courtyard. For a week, Haruto meditated under the waterfall near their village. He listened to the wind in the trees, the chirping of crickets, the sound of his own breath. He repeated his kata beneath the rush of cold water until his muscles ached and his teeth chattered. When he returned to the dojo, soaked and silent, Kojiro nodded without a word. That day, Haruto began his true training. The days were brutal. Every morning began before dawn. Kojiro drilled them not only in sword work, but in the stillness that must precede action. The sword is not a tool for violence, he said. It is a mirror. If your spirit is turbulent, your blade will falter. Haruto learned to anticipate attacks not by watching his opponent's hands, but by sensing the shift in their breath. He learned to control his own heartbeat, to hold a stance without trembling, to strike not with force, but with intent. One day, Kojiro brought out a real katana. Its blade shimmered with a quiet menace. This is not for show, Kojiro said. It is for clarity. He held the sword out to Haruto. The boy took it with reverence, the weight unfamiliar but not unwelcome. He bowed and assumed his stance. You are ready, Kojiro said. But understand this, a sword kills not only the enemy. It kills a piece of you, too. Each time. If you wield it with pride, you will rot from within. Haruto nodded. Then I will never strike in pride. Kojiro's eyes narrowed. We shall see. That night, Haruto walked home beneath a moon so bright it cast shadows like brushstrokes across the path. Masanori met him in the garden, seated with a clay teapot and 2 cups. You have touched a true blade, Masanori said, pouring tea with steady hands. How did it feel? Alive, Haruto answered. As if it breathes. Masanori smiled faintly. Good. That is how it should be. Haruto hesitated. Father. Kojiro said the sword kills part of the one who uses it. Do you believe that? Masanori looked up at the sky, where clouds drifted lazily like ships. Yes. I have buried many parts of myself on the battlefield. I no longer know which ones remain. Then, how do you keep from becoming hollow? You don't, Masanori said. You live with it. Like death, it walks beside you. You give it room, but not control. Haruto sipped his tea. The bitterness cut through the evening calm. And yet it was warm. That winter, he trained until his fingers bled and calloused. He fought sparring matches against older boys, often losing, but never retreating. In time, he began to win. Not through speed, but through calm. At 15, he was given his first real sword, a gift from Masanori, forged by a mountain smith, its hilt wrapped in black cord and the guard shaped like a falling leaf. Name it, Masanori said. Haruto considered. Then he whispered, Kage no Tomo. The friend in shadow. In the spring of Haruto's 16th year, the scent of war replaced that of blossoms. Kyoto trembled, not from earthquakes or storms, but from whispers. Men in armor rode through narrow streets, their banners fluttering with clan insignias. Couriers galloped past shrines, ignoring the incense smoke rising toward the heavens. The Genpei War had begun, and with it, the land cracked open like a shell to reveal its molten core. The Sigusa, though small in number, could no longer remain observers. Masanori received a summons from a Minamoto general, a call to arms for loyal retainers in the western provinces. That evening, the household gathered in silence as Masanori opened the scroll. It has come, he said. We ride at dawn. Haruto stood without hesitation. I will go. Masanori's gaze rested on him for a long moment. You are not yet a man. I carry death, Haruto said, his voice steady. You taught me that was enough. There was a flicker of pride in Masanori's eyes, but also sorrow. You ride at my side, he finally said. Not ahead. That night, Haruto did not sleep. He sat alone in the courtyard, beneath the moonlit cherry tree, Kage no Tomo resting in his lap. The petals drifted silently around him, like spirits paying their respects. In the morning, clad in armor that still bore the scent of lacquer and cedar, Haruto mounted his horse beside his father. The company was small, 30 samurai, a handful of Ashigaru, and a pair of monks offering blessings. They rode east, toward the province of Yamashiro, where a Taira force had begun to fortify a river crossing. The journey took 3 days. On the 4th morning, Haruto smelled the battlefield before he saw it. Smoke, sweat, and blood mingled in the air like ink and ash. The Sigusa joined with Minamoto troops just as the sun burned off the morning mist. Across the river, crimson-clad Taira samurai lined the opposite bank. The banners of the white butterfly flapped above their heads, serene even in the chaos. Haruto's heart pounded like a war drum. His hands, though steady, trembled faintly. He looked to Masanori. Do not seek glory, his father said. Seek balance. Let death walk beside you, but do not let it lead. Kojiro's lessons rang in his mind like temple bells. Empty yourself. Quiet your thoughts. See not with the eyes, but with the spirit. When the signal arrow soared into the sky, Haruto surged forward with the rest of the cavalry, hooves thundering over the earth. The river crossing erupted into noise and chaos, screams, steel on steel, the roar of pain and victory mingled like a terrible symphony. A Terra samurai emerged from the smoke, eyes blazing, katana already mid-swing. Haruto met the blow with Kage no Tomo, parrying just in time. The clash reverberated through his bones. The world slowed. He could hear his own breath. See the twitch of his opponent's shoulder. Feel the tension in the ground beneath their feet. Another strike, Haruto countered, turned, swept the man's legs, and disarmed him. The enemy fell, stunned, his sword lost in the mud. Haruto raised his blade, and hesitated. The man looked up, his face young, no older than Haruto himself. Fear shone in his eyes, not cowardice, but the human instinct to cling to life. Haruto stepped back. Go. The man stared, then fled. The choice felt right in the moment. But war does not reward righteousness. Later that day, the same soldier returned, not alone, but with 4 others. They overwhelmed one of Haruto's comrades, slaying him before retreating. When Masanori learned what had happened, he said nothing for a long time. That night, by the firelight, he finally spoke. "You carry a heart," he said. "That is good. But it can become a burden in war. Mercy can sharpen the blade of your enemy." Haruto stared into the flames. "Was I wrong?" "No," Masanori said. "But rightness is not always safe. You will learn where the balance lies, or you will die searching for it." The next day, Haruto returned to the field. He fought with clarity, not cruelty. He struck when necessary, defended without pride. But he never forgot the eyes of the boy he spared. That night, as the Minamoto secured the crossing, Haruto walked alone by the river. His armor was stained with blood, some his own, some not. He knelt by the water and washed his hands slowly, as if cleansing something deeper than skin. The moon watched him in silence. The victory at the river should have brought pride. Instead, it brought silence. The Sigusa returned to their temporary encampment in the forested hills outside Yamashiro. Their losses had been minimal, but the tension in the air weighed heavier than the smoke that had choked the battlefield. Haruto sat apart from the others, his armor off, his blade across his knees. He couldn't stop thinking about the man he'd spared, and the comrade who died because of it. Yamato, a young warrior with a crooked smile and quick wit, had fought beside Haruto during the crossing. It was his first battle as well. He had spoken that morning of seeing his wife again, of planting rice in peace once the war was over. Now he lay buried beneath a mound of river stones. Kojiro's words returned to Haruto with quiet force: "A sword kills not only the enemy. It kills a piece of you, too." Masanori approached quietly, his footsteps light as falling petals. "You haven't eaten," he said, placing a small lacquered box beside Haruto. Inside were rice balls, pickled plum, and a folded piece of smoked fish. Haruto didn't touch them. "It was my fault." Masanori knelt beside him. "It was war. I let him live," Haruto said. "And Yamato died." "You made a choice," Masanori said. "That is what it means to carry death. It walks beside you, but it listens to your voice. That is both its danger, and its gift." Haruto stared at his hands, raw from gripping the hilt too tightly. "How do you know when to show mercy?" "You don't. You only learn to live with the consequence, whatever it is." Haruto finally lifted the rice ball to his mouth. He chewed in silence, not out of hunger, but because the taste reminded him he was still alive. The next day, orders arrived from the Minamoto General Yorimasa. They were to march north to assist in a siege. Masanori gathered the men, but Haruto noticed the change in him. He had grown quieter, more distant. In private, he spent long hours studying maps, not speaking. They marched 2 days through mountain passes shrouded in mist. The road narrowed, the trees crowding the path like silent watchers. Scouts reported movement. Masanori ordered a halt. That night, Masanori summoned Haruto alone. "There is something I must teach you," he said. "Something not spoken of in dojos or scrolls." They stood in a grove of pine, moonlight dappling the forest floor. Masanori drew his katana, not to fight, but to demonstrate. "There are 3 deaths a samurai must face," he began. "The first is the death of fear. Until you've seen it and walked through it, you are still a child. You've faced this now." Haruto nodded slowly. "The second is the death of others, those you love, those you fail to save. This death you cannot master. You can only endure it." Haruto said nothing, but his breath trembled. "The third," Masanori continued, "is the death of self. When all you were and believed in is stripped away. When even your name feels hollow. That death waits for all warriors who live long enough." He sheathed the sword. "If you survive that death, then, and only then, you will be free." Haruto looked at his father's face in the moonlight. It was lined, not from age, but from knowledge carved deep into the soul. "Have you faced the third death?" "I live with its memory every day." Before Haruto could ask more, a horn sounded in the distance. A scout came running through the trees. "Lord Masanori! Ambush! They're upon us!" The camp erupted into chaos. Steel flashed under torchlight. Screams echoed in the darkness. From the shadows came arrows, then fire. The rival clan had struck. Not the Taira, but local retainers seeking favor by crushing a Minamoto contingent. Masanori drew his blade and charged into the fray. Haruto followed, Kage no Tomo a silver arc in the dark. They fought side by side, father and son. Masanori moved like wind through reeds, cutting down enemies with grim efficiency. Haruto guarded his back, blocking strikes, countering with precise fury. But they were outnumbered. A cry rose, "Fall back! Regroup at the stone ridge." Haruto turned, just in time to see an enemy spearman drive forward toward Masanori's flank. "Father!" He lunged, parrying the spear, but another attacker was already closing in behind. Steel met flesh. Masanori staggered. Blood bloomed across his chest. Haruto screamed. Rage surged through him as he cut down the attackers in a blur. But it was too late. He dropped to his knees, catching his father as he fell. Masanori's eyes fluttered open. Blood trickled from his lips. "Remember, the third death," he rasped. Then he went still. Haruto held him long after the battle ended, as the remaining Sigusa regrouped and pushed back the enemy. Victory meant nothing. That night, the pine grove was silent. Only the wind mourned. Haruto buried his father beneath the tallest tree, placing Kage no Tomo at the grave for a moment before reclaiming it. He stood in silence, every breath a battle. He had faced the first death. He had tasted the second. And now, unknowingly, he had begun walking toward the third. The battlefield had quieted, but Haruto's world remained deafening. The embers of burning tents crackled in the dawn. Smoke curled around the broken pine grove like incense offered to unseen gods. The remaining Sigusa, bloodied and leaderless, had scattered under the weight of the ambush. Haruto had stayed behind, refusing to leave his father's grave. That was where they found him. Iron-capped spears. Red banners. Men bearing the sigil of the Akagawa clan, vassals of the Taira, known not for honor, but for cruelty. Haruto made no attempt to flee. He stood as they surrounded him, Kage no Tomo still gripped in his bloodied hands. "Who is this boy?" one of them asked. "Just another orphaned cub," sneered another. "Strip him. Bind him." They wrenched the sword from Haruto's grasp. He did not resist. He watched the blade disappear into enemy hands, like a part of his soul being severed. They marched him east, through woods and scorched villages, past paddy fields that whispered of peace he would never know. The chains around his wrists chafed raw. Food was meager. Water was less. Days blurred. At night, in the makeshift prison, a bamboo pen outside the Akagawa garrison, Haruto sat in silence while other prisoners wept or cursed. He said nothing. An old monk, also captured, watched him with quiet curiosity. One night, he approached. "You are young," the monk said. "But your eyes are not." Haruto looked up. "I buried my father with no rites. That will age a man." The monk studied him. "You carry death. But you carry it as a wound. I was taught to carry it as a companion. And yet now it devours you." Haruto did not answer. The monk sat beside him. "What is your name, child?" "Haruto of the Sigusa." "No. That name was taken with your sword. You have no clan here. No rank. No shield but your spirit." Haruto clenched his jaw. "Then I am nothing." The monk shook his head. "That is the first lie you must unlearn. When a man loses everything, he is free to choose who he becomes. That is the gift of captivity, if you can survive it." Haruto looked away, but the words settled inside him like seeds on dry soil. The days grew colder. One morning, a guard dragged Haruto from the pen and led him to the courtyard. There stood Lord Akagawa himself, a man with robes too fine for a warrior, and eyes that glittered with disdain. "You are the son of Masanori?" he asked. Haruto nodded, defiant. "A pity. He died for a lost cause." Haruto said nothing. Akagawa circled him. "You spared one of my men in the river battle, did you not?" Haruto stiffened. "Yes, we heard. He lives, thanks to you. He believes it was divine mercy. I believe it was foolishness. I made a choice," Haruto said quietly. "I live with it. You may not live long." Akagawa turned away. "Still, there is poetry in your story. A young samurai captured after showing mercy. Perhaps I'll make you a tale to frighten arrogant boys." He raised his hand. "Prepare him for execution." At dawn, Haruto was dragged back to the pen, beaten, stripped of his outer garments. The monk tended his wounds that night with trembling fingers and whispered prayers. "I told you that you are free to choose," he said. "Even now." "To choose what?" "How to die. To choose how to meet death. With fear, or with peace." Haruto closed his eyes. "I am afraid." The monk nodded. "Then breathe. Speak to the fear. Sit with it, as you would a companion." Haruto breathed deeply. He remembered his father's hand on his shoulder. Kojiro's still eyes. The scent of pine and iron. The flutter of cherry blossoms. When dawn came, the guards led him out. He walked without trembling. They tied him to a post in the center of the camp. Warriors gathered to watch, most indifferent, some curious, one or two silently respectful. Akagawa stood on the porch, sipping tea. "Any last words?" he asked lazily. Haruto looked to the sky. The clouds drifted in lazy silence. "I carry death," he said. "But I do not fear it. If you take my life, you only return me to the earth. But you cannot take what I have already given." Akagawa raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" "My soul," Haruto said. "It is already free." The executioner raised his blade. The camp held its breath. Then, "Wait." The voice came from the gate. A rider had arrived, Minamoto colors fluttering, scroll in hand. "By order of Lord Uramasa," the rider shouted, "the boy is to be ransomed. He is to return with us." Akagawa's face soured. "Tch. Let the ghost go, then. But he will not be the last." The ropes were cut. Haruto staggered forward, light-headed and dizzy. The monk bowed to him. "You walked through the third death," he said softly. "Now live." The road back to the Minamoto camp was long, but it felt shorter than the nights Haruto had spent chained in silence. He rode behind the envoy, his body still weak, stomach hollow, and mind stretched taut like a bowstring. The landscape blurred past, pines, rivers, scorched fields. Yet he absorbed every detail with sharpened senses, as if seeing the world anew. He was not the same boy who had left with his father. The weight of death no longer frightened him. It had already entered, passed through, and left something stronger in its wake. They arrived at the Minamoto encampment outside Fukuchiyama just after sunset. Torches flared and guards stood at attention as the envoy presented their charge. Haruto dismounted slowly, his feet unsteady. "Name?" a soldier asked, eyeing him with suspicion. Haruto paused. "Haruto, of the Sigusa." The man frowned. "That clan was wiped out near Yamashiro. Your father fell in battle." Haruto nodded once. "I know. I buried him myself." The soldier's posture shifted. "You're the one they said was captured. The one who didn't break." Haruto said nothing. His silence was enough. He was given a cot near the edge of the camp and a spare robe. No sword. No armor. No clan crest. That night, he dreamt of standing in a sea of falling petals, surrounded by voices, Masanoris, Kojiros, the monks, whispers rising and fading with the wind. "You carry death, now carry life." The next morning, he walked to the training field where Minamoto warriors sparred in tight, disciplined pairs. Shouts rang out. Blades clashed. Dust rose. Haruto stood at the edge, arms folded in his sleeves. A tall samurai broke from the formation, removing his helmet. His face was sun-scarred, eyes sharp. "You. Are you the prisoner?" "I was," Haruto replied. The man studied him. "If you want to eat, you fight. If you want to stay, you prove yourself. No one here honors ghosts." "I don't seek honor," Haruto said. "Only steel." The samurai grinned. "Then earn it." They tossed him a wooden practice sword. Haruto caught it without ceremony, stepped into the ring, and bowed. He faced 3 opponents that day. He lost once. Won twice. Each time, he rose quickly, eyes unshaken. Later that evening, as he washed his face at the well, a familiar voice called to him from the shadows. "I heard you've returned." Haruto turned. Master Kojiro stood beneath a lantern, robes simple, gaze unchanged. "I thought you had vanished with the Sigusa," Haruto said. I walk where the wind carries me, Kojiro replied. But I always find my students. Especially those who have seen the other side of life. Haruto bowed deeply. I lost my sword. You lost a piece of yourself, Kojiro corrected. Now you must forge a new one. Haruto looked up. How? Kojiro stepped closer. By choosing what kind of blade you wish to become. There are many kinds. The sword that cuts through enemies. The sword that guards the innocent. The sword that never leaves its scabbard. Haruto was silent for a moment. I want to become the sword that remembers. Kojiro's brow lifted. Explain. I spared a man and lost a friend. I fought and lost my father. I lived, though I wished not to. I carry those moments now. Not to regret them, but to learn. Kojiro smiled faintly. Then you are already forging the blade. That night, Kojiro led him to a blacksmith's hut on the edge of camp. Inside, an old smith was stoking a fire, his face half hidden in soot. He owes me a favor, Kojiro said. He will craft you a new sword, but you must quench it in your own reflection. Haruto frowned. What does that mean? The smith spoke, his voice gravel. To forge a weapon without understanding the soul that wields it is to make a fong for a beast. You must give the blade its name. But first, you must name yourself. Haruto stared into the flames. Not Haruto the son. Not Haruto the captive. Not even Haruto of the Sigusa. He saw the death he had carried. The pain he had endured. The resolve that had grown. I am Haruto no Kage, he said at last. Haruto of the shadow. The one who walks with what others fear. The smith nodded. Then your blade shall bear that name. Over the next 3 days, Haruto helped hammer the sword himself. The hiss of molten steel, the rhythm of striking metal, the glow of transformation, it all felt like a ritual. A rebirth. When the sword was finished, it was not ornate. The guard was plain, the hilt wrapped in black cord, the sheath made from darkened oak. But the edge gleamed like the moon in a pool of ink. He drew it, felt the weight, and knew, it was part of him now. Kojiro stood beside him. What will you do now? Haruto looked toward the eastern horizon, where smoke rose again. I will fight. Not for glory. Not for vengeance. But to ensure that others don't have to walk as far with death as I did. Kojiro nodded. And so Haruto no Kage, no longer heir to a forgotten clan, but a blade forged in fire and silence, stepped back onto the battlefield. Not as a boy. But as a warrior who had died and returned with purpose. Whispers moved through the Minamoto ranks like wine through bamboo. He came back from the Akagawa alive. He forged his own sword. He fights like he's already dead. Some thought Haruto no Kage was a ghost. Others called him a madman. But few questioned his discipline. On the field, he moved like still water, never rushing, never hesitating. He fought without cruelty, without pride, and, when possible, without killing. It was this last habit that stirred unease among his comrades. Why not finish them, barked one grizzled veteran after a skirmish in the hills near Hoki province. Leave a man breathing, and you invite his blade tomorrow. Haruto wiped the blood from his cheek. If a man throws down his sword, he becomes my shadow, not my enemy. The veteran scoffed. Shadows stab, boy. They hide knives. But Haruto's eyes were calm. So does fear. In private, Kojiro said nothing. Only watched. They moved east, deeper into fractured provinces, where Terra resistance hardened. Villages burned. Roads disappeared into ash. The war was no longer a contest of ideals, it was attrition. In one ruined village, Haruto found a boy no older than 10, huddled in the remains of a stable. His hands were raw, his ribs showing. "What is your name?" Haruto asked, crouching beside him. The boy flinched. "Don't kill me. I'm not here to kill." The boy blinked. "Then why do you wear a sword?" "To remind me not to use it unless I must." Haruto gave him food and wrapped a worn cloak around the boy's shoulders. As he walked away, the boy called after him, "You don't fight like the others." Haruto paused. "I fight to stop fighting." The boy didn't understand. But he smiled. That night, around the fire, Kojiro spoke. "You risk your life every time you leave a man standing." "I know. And still you do it." "Yes." Kojiro stirred the flames with a twig. "Do you believe mercy makes the world better?" Haruto thought for a long time. "No. Not alone. But it reminds me what kind of world I want to live in." Kojiro gave a slow nod. "Then you are not a fool. Only a man with an impossible goal." The next day, scouts returned with grave news. A high-ranking Taira captain, Lord Sadaki, had set up camp in the mountain pass. He had been responsible for razing 3 villages in retaliation for Minamoto advances. Yorimasa himself, now aging and wearied by war, called for volunteers to intercept and kill Sadaki. Kojiro was among the first to step forward. Haruto followed without hesitation. That night, as they prepared to leave, a message arrived, carried by a wounded horse and a dead rider. Sadaki had taken hostages. Women, children, and old men from a nearby village. They were chained to the perimeter of his camp. "Coward," muttered one warrior. "No," said Kojiro. "He is clever. If we strike, we become the monsters." Yorimasa's face darkened. "But if we wait, they die." A hush fell over the camp. Every path led through blood. Haruto stepped forward. "Let me go alone." The tent turned toward him in disbelief. "You'll be killed before you reach the gate," someone spat. "Maybe," Haruto said. "But I've walked with death before. And I know its steps." Kojiro frowned. "This is not a lesson." Haruto looked at him. "Then it's a test." At dawn, under a sky that glowed pale blue, Haruto descended the mountain alone. He carried no banner. No companions. Only his sword, and the silence within him. When he reached the outer edge of Sadaki's camp, arrows were notched, but not loosed. He raised his empty hands. "I come to speak," he called. Sadaki emerged from his pavilion, red armor glinting, his face etched with arrogance. "You must be the merciful swordsman," he sneered. "They say you walk through fire and call it fog." "I walk with death," Haruto replied. "And I ask for peace." Sadaki laughed. "You came here to plead for peasants?" Haruto met his gaze. "I came to offer a trade." Sadaki tilted his head. "A trade?" "My life. For theirs. Kill me, and let them go." The Taira captain studied him for a long time. Then he laughed again. "And if I kill you and keep them? You'll prove to your men you fear even an unarmed boy." Sadaki's face hardened. "You play a dangerous game, samurai." "I'm not playing." A silence stretched. Then, shockingly, Sadaki gestured. "Release the prisoners." His men hesitated. "I said release them. Let the ghost have his moment." One by one, the hostages were unchained. They ran, some limping, some weeping, toward the trees. Haruto waited. Then Sadaki stepped forward and drew his sword. No words now. Show me if death truly walks with you. Haruto bowed. As you wish. The duel was brutal. Sadaki was no fool, he was fast, seasoned, and full of rage. But Haruto had something deeper, stillness. He parried every blow with precision, his blade never wasting motion. They circled like wolves, the entire camp watching. Then, one slip. Haruto stepped inside and brought his sword to Sadaki's throat. The tip hovered. Do it, Sadaki spat. Haruto slowly lowered the blade. I leave you alive. Not as a kindness, but as a burden. Live knowing you were beaten by a boy who chose not to become you. Sadaki's face twisted with hatred, but he said nothing. Haruto turned and walked away, leaving the enemy camp in stunned silence. When he returned to the Minamoto camp, even the veteran who had once mocked him stood. You're not a ghost, he muttered. You're something worse. Haruto bowed. I am a mirror. Fight yourself, and you'll understand. By the end of summer, Haruto's name was no longer spoken in jest. Across the provinces, stories whispered through inns and temples, a samurai who spared enemies and returned stronger each time, a swordsman whose blade moved like water but struck like thunder. His actions at the mountain pass had become legend. To some, he was a saint of war. To others, a danger to tradition. Yet Haruto felt none of it. Praise and rumor drifted past him like smoke. His path was not shaped by glory, but by the question that haunted his every step: how do you live as a warrior without becoming a killer in your soul? Master Kojiro, though still present, had begun to speak less. He watched Haruto now with a distant eye, not as a teacher judging progress, but as one waiting to see if the path his student walked would collapse under its own impossible burden. It wasn't long before that burden returned, wearing a familiar face. In early autumn, the Minamoto pushed into the Harima province. The Taira had regrouped, and Haruto was assigned to a scouting unit tasked with surveying the roads ahead. The forests were thick with orange leaves, the ground soft with rot. Their unit moved quietly, but the air itself seemed to tense. Too quiet, muttered Sadanobu, a gruff samurai who now served alongside Haruto, no longer openly skeptical but not quite trusting. Then, a whistle through the air. Arrows. Ambush. The trees exploded with movement. Taira soldiers surged from the underbrush, blades flashing. Haruto unsheathed his sword with instinct, already dancing through their ranks, his every motion a prayer of restraint and necessity. Steel clashed. Men fell. But this fight was different. A figure emerged from the chaos, taller than the rest, face hidden behind a half-mask painted with a red crescent. Haruto turned. Their eyes met. And in that moment, he knew. It was the man he had spared at the river, all those seasons ago. The Taira soldier had not died. He had returned, not in gratitude, but in vengeance. You left me alive, the masked man growled. You took my shame and planted it in my chest. Haruto narrowed his eyes. I gave you a second path. You gave me no choice but to become a demon, the man hissed. Now I return the favor. Their swords met in a storm of strikes, faster, more vicious than Haruto expected. The man had trained hard since their last encounter. His anger had sharpened his blade, made him unpredictable. Haruto parried, deflected, stepped lightly, but he was not fighting a rival. He was fighting his own shadow. The consequence of compassion. You made me nothing, the man spat. You unmade my honor. They mocked me for living. Haruto slid aside a thrust, then countered, but did not kill. You could have chosen peace, Haruto said, breath steady. You could have walked away from vengeance. I tried, the man barked, but your mercy was a curse. A man without purpose cannot live. Haruto hesitated. And in that pause, the man struck. A shallow cut opened across Haruto's ribs, pain flared, sharp and cold. But instead of rage, Haruto felt sorrow. Not for himself, but for the man who had mistaken survival for shame. Haruto swept his leg, knocked the man down, disarmed him with a twist of his wrist. The katana clattered to the leaves. Haruto raised his blade to the man's throat. The other fighters had paused, watching. Haruto stared down at the man who once knelt before him in fear, and now knelt again, but in fury. I will not kill you, Haruto said. But not because I pity you. Because this time, I do not believe you are beyond choice. The man's lip curled. Then you are a fool again. Haruto sheathed his sword. Perhaps. But better a fool with mercy than a warrior without soul. He turned away. But the man scrambled to his feet, drawing a hidden dagger, aiming for Haruto's back. Sadanobu, watching nearby, stepped forward in a blur, and ended it. The dagger fell. So did the man. Haruto turned too late. Sadanobu stood over the body. You gave him one chance. That was enough. Haruto's face tightened, but he nodded. He looked down at the man's body. I hoped he would see. Not everyone wants to, Sadanobu said, sheathing his blade. But you made the offer. That matters. That night, Haruto sat with Kojiro under the stars. You spared him twice, Kojiro said. Would you do it a third time? Haruto closed his eyes. Yes. Even knowing the end. Why? Because he needed to see that not all warriors are born to kill. Some are born to remind others that they can choose. Kojiro said nothing for a long time. Then, you are nearing the edge of a path no samurai has walked. Most will call you naive. Some will call you traitor. All will test you. Haruto nodded. Let them. If I fall, I'll fall without becoming what they expect. And from the branches above, the leaves fell in silence, like the quiet rain of forgotten souls. Victory on the battlefield often bred restlessness in the camp. In the weeks following the ambush in Harima, the Minamoto forces pushed westward, retaking villages and securing key roads. The fighting eased, but tension did not. In the quiet, tempers sharpened. Idle swords longed for purpose. And among the rank and file, a new danger stirred, resentment. Haruto no Kage, once dismissed as an idealistic youth, now held the ear of commanders. His tactics were precise, his restraint admirable, and his presence uncanny. Even the war-weary Yorimasa had begun asking for his counsel. And not everyone welcomed it. He's not a soldier, muttered one samurai to another at the campfires. He's a monk with a blade. He's dangerous, said another. The Taira fear him, but so do our men. No one wants to fight beside a ghost. In the officer's tent, the whispers became bolder. We fight to win. Not to teach lessons. He shows mercy where we show steel. If we let his thinking spread, we'll forget how to finish a war. Among the most vocal was General Fujikawa, a hard man of low birth who had risen through sheer brutality. His armor was blackened iron, his blade never polished. He did not believe in honor, only results. One evening, as the command council gathered around the strategy table, Haruto was invited to speak. Maps lay open. The next offensive would target a Taira stronghold south of Bichu. If we strike at dawn, Haruto said, pointing, we can avoid the village. Spare the civilians. The castle will fall regardless. Fujikawa leaned forward. And what of the farms? What of the food stored within? We take only what is needed. Leave them enough to survive. Fujikawa snorted. You wage war like a poet. This is not a duel under cherry blossoms. It's survival. Haruto met his gaze calmly. And what survives if we scorch the earth behind us? Rice can be regrown. Trust cannot. Fujikawa slammed his hand on the table. Spoken like a child of nobles. Have you starved, boy? Have you buried comrades who died with empty stomachs? Haruto did not flinch. I've buried comrades who died with empty hearts. The room went silent. After the meeting, Kojiro caught up with Haruto beneath the torii gate outside the camp. You're making enemies, the old master said. I'm making them see, Haruto replied. See, yes. But not all will look kindly. That night, someone entered Haruto's tent while he slept. The blade was cold against his neck. You talk too much, a voice whispered. Time to see if you bleed like the rest of us. But Haruto was already awake. He moved with fluid precision, grabbing the attacker's wrist, twisting it until the blade fell. They struggled. The intruder wore no armor, just black cloth and a cloth mask. Haruto struck once, hard, and the man went down, unconscious. Sadanobu burst in moments later, sword drawn. You all right? Haruto nodded. He didn't come to rob me. They tied the man and brought him before the guards. When the mask was pulled away, silence followed. He was one of Fujikawa's men. The next morning, Haruto stood before Uramesa's tent with Kojiro and Sadanobu at his sides. The general sat quietly, examining the report. Fujikawa stood across the room, arms folded. I did not order the attack, Fujikawa said coolly. I cannot control every worm that crawls through my ranks. But he came from your company, Kojiro said. And the worms eat from the fruit closest to them. Fujikawa's eyes flashed. If the boy can't handle fear, he shouldn't walk with death. Haruto stepped forward. Let it be, my lord. This is not the battle I choose. Uramesa looked up. You're asking me to spare him? I ask only that we see the war as more than swordplay. Let him return to the ranks. With eyes open. The old general studied him. You're brave. And dangerously principled. I should have had you lead a monastery, not a regiment. He dismissed them all with a weary sigh. Outside the tent, Fujikawa brushed past Haruto. One day, he said quietly, your mercy will kill something you care about. Haruto replied without looking at him. It already has. That evening, Kojiro sat beside Haruto at the edge of the cliff overlooking the plains. Fires flickered in the distance, both Minamoto and Taira. The war went on, indifferent. You walk a narrow bridge, Kojiro said. And no one holds a lantern for you. I don't need light, Haruto said. I just need to feel the wind. Kojiro smiled. Even wind can betray you. Haruto nodded. Then I'll walk in silence. Like the blade. Autumn turned sharp in Bichu, the wind scraping dry leaves across stone paths like whispers from the dead. Orders came on a scroll sealed with Uramesa's personal crest, eliminate Lord Tsunemori, a senior Terra commander moving through the northern valleys. He is to be intercepted before he reaches the fortress at Hinomi. No survivors. Haruto stood before the war table as the orders were read. His breath caught at the name. Terra Tsunemori. A name burned into memory, though not with hatred. He had met the man once, as a boy of 10, on the road to Mount Kurama. Masanori had stopped their small procession to bow. Haruto had watched his father, normally quiet but proud, lower his head with something deeper than protocol, respect. That man, Masanori had whispered after, once spared me during the siege of Nara. He let me walk away wounded, when he could have taken my head. I've owed him a debt for 2 decades. Now Haruto was ordered to repay it with blood. Later that night, Kojiro found Haruto in the training yard, practicing kata in silence, his blade slicing the air like a reed through water. "You received the assignment," Kojiro said. "I did. You will not refuse?" "I cannot. But you do not wish it." Haruto paused. "He spared my father. I was taught that mercy is strength. And now I'm told to snuff it out." Kojiro's eyes searched his face. "If you go not as a son. Not as a boy honoring the past. You go as a samurai bound to duty." Haruto's jaw tensed. "And if my duty violates my soul? Then you must decide which blade to draw, the one that kills, or the one that remembers." At dawn, Haruto rode with a detachment of 10 warriors under cover of fog. They wore no banners, ghosts in service of quiet death. Tsunemori's procession was modest, a few soldiers, a priest, and a palanquin with faded gold lacquer. He traveled without armor, trusting the mountains to shield him from threats. Haruto and his unit waited in silence on the ridge overlooking the mountain road. Every man prepared his bow. All eyes turned to Haruto. He did not raise his. "I will go down," he said. Sadanobu frowned. "You'll be outnumbered. I won't be drawing steel. Not unless I must." Before anyone could stop him, Haruto descended the slope, cloak trailing behind him like a shadow unbound. He walked directly onto the path, hands empty, sword at his side. The Taira guards shouted, blades drawn. Tsunemori stepped from the palanquin, surprised, but calm. "Who are you?" the elder lord asked. Haruto bowed low. "I am Haruto, son of Shigusa Masanori." Tsunemori blinked, then took a slow step forward. "Masanori. I remember him. A man of conviction. He said you spared him. That you let him walk away at Nara." "I did." "Why?" Haruto asked. Tsunemori gave a sad smile. "Because I had seen too much killing. Because he fought with honor. Because I believed then, as I do now, that war makes monsters of men unless we remember we were once human." Haruto's throat tightened. "Then you understand why I'm here." The older man looked up at the ridge. He saw the archers waiting. "So. This is how the wheel turns. I came to speak first. If I strike, I want it to be with eyes open. Not from a cliff." Tsunemori nodded. "You are your father's son." A pause. Then, softly. "Will you kill me?" "I am ordered to." "And yet you speak first." "I speak because death deserves no silence." Tsunemori turned to his guards and raised a hand. "Stand down." Haruto's men on the ridge shifted in confusion. "I am tired of fleeing," the old lord said. "If I must die, then let it be before one who understands mercy." Haruto drew his sword, slowly. Kage no Tomo gleamed in the morning mist. They stood across from one another in the center of the road. Tsunemori did not draw his blade. "Will you strike an unarmed man?" "No," Haruto whispered. "Not now. Not ever." He turned, sheathing the sword. His men stared in disbelief as he returned alone, Tsunemori alive behind him. "What have you done?" Sadanobu hissed. Haruto faced them all. I upheld the code that created me. I will not kill a man for showing my father mercy. You defied orders. I followed something older than the order. Something deeper. That night, he waited for Uramesa's summons. It came. The general said nothing for a long time after Haruto entered. You disobeyed a direct command, Uramesa finally said. Why? Haruto stood tall. Because the man I was sent to kill once gave life. I refused to erase that. Uramesa rubbed his temples. You are testing the limits of what this army will tolerate. I do not seek tolerance, Haruto said. Only truth. The general's voice softened. You are dangerous, Haruto. Not because of your blade, but because others are starting to believe you. I do not ask them to follow. But they do. A silence passed. Then, return to your post. For now. But know this, if you refuse the next order, I will not protect you. Haruto bowed. Understood. That night, he sat beside Kojiro in the dark. You spared him, the master said. I could not cut the hand that once let my father live. Kojiro nodded. Then you have passed another death. Haruto looked up. Which one? The death of obedience. They sat together in silence as the wind swept through the camp. Somewhere, far away, a battle stirred, but for the moment, the sword that remembered rested in its sheath. In the days following Haruto's defiance, the Minamoto camp no longer moved as one. The outer appearance remained, banners flying, messengers riding, scouts reporting in disciplined rotation, but beneath it, cracks had begun to spiderweb. Loyalty, once unquestioned, now hung on sharp threads of fear, pride, and ambition. It began with whispers. He disobeyed a direct order. He let a Terra Lord walk free. He's no samurai, he's a shrine priest with a sword. By the third day, men had begun to shift their tents farther from Haruto's. Fewer sparred with him in the morning. Some refused to meet his eyes. Only Kojiro, Sadanobu, and a handful of younger soldiers still stood at his side. Truth spread slowly, Kojiro muttered one night as they sat near the edge of the encampment, listening to the campfire's crackle. But fear spreads like wildfire. Then let it burn, Haruto replied. We'll see who still stands in the ash. The worst came not from rumor, but from ambition. General Fujikawa, already embittered by Haruto's rising influence, saw his chance. He gathered a faction of hardline officers, men who valued discipline above all else, and presented a formal complaint to Uramesa. Haruto no Kage, by sparing Lord Tsunemori, had jeopardized the war effort. His actions sowed insubordination. His presence endangered unity. Uramesa, weary and strained, summoned Haruto once more. I should remove your sword, he said, rubbing his temple. Or send you to the front lines alone to prove your usefulness. I would go, Haruto said. But it would not change what I did. Uramesa looked at him, tired but not unkind. Why do you insist on walking this path alone? Because the path of the many is steeped in blood, and none of them remember why it was spilled. The general sighed. Do you know what happens to those who refuse to bend in war? They break. Uramesa nodded. And when they break others with them. That night, Haruto returned to his tent to find it slashed open. Inside, his possessions were scattered. His armor desecrated with ink and mud. Kageno Tomo was missing. He didn't speak. He simply turned and walked to Fujikawa's section of the camp. The men there stiffened at his approach. Some watched with feigned disinterest. Others looked away. Sadanobu joined him halfway. You're going to confront them? No. I'm going to reclaim myself. They found the sword laid across a fire pit like a mock offering. Haruto walked through the crowd without anger. He picked up the blade and inspected it. It was untouched. No nicks. No scratches. Just insult. He turned to Fujikawa's men. Do you believe taking this will silence me? A few muttered. One laughed. Haruto's eyes locked with the man. You fear what I represent. Because I do not need to kill to earn my name. The man stepped forward, hand on his sword. You disgrace the armor you wear. Haruto didn't move. Then remove it. The man drew his sword. In a flash, Haruto moved. Kageno Tomo sang through the air. He disarmed the soldier in a single motion, no injury, no blood, just a clean dismissal of force. The blade stopped a breath from the man's throat. I carry death, Haruto said. But I give it only to those who have forgotten life. He stepped back and turned, walking away without another word. The camp watched in silence. Later that evening, Kojiro found him by the river, washing the dust from his hands. You didn't humiliate him, Kojiro said. No, Haruto said. But I reminded him I could. Kojiro chuckled softly. There's a lesson in that. Haruto dried his hands. I've given them all the truth I can. Now they must decide what to do with it. But Haruto was not the only one making moves. That same night, Fujikawa sent word to another general in a nearby province, an ally of his, known for his disdain of Yorimasa's leadership. The old man weakens. The boy spreads heresy. The army fractures. Soon, it will be time. What began as a whisper of dissent had grown into something more, a brewing insurrection. Not against the Taira, but within the Minamoto ranks themselves. The fracture had deepened. And in the middle of it, Haruto stood, silent, calm, and increasingly alone. The first cut came quietly. 3 days after the sword incident, Haruto awoke to find a message pinned to the outside of his tent, no signature, just a folded parchment sealed with a wax imprint of a broken bough. Fujikawa rides for Tomonoura by nightfall. He moves to meet General Morinaga. They will not return as allies. The Minamoto banner will be split before the next moon. Haruto stared at the note long after he had read it. The camp still bustled, unaware that war now brewed not only across valleys and rivers, but inside its very blood. He went first to Kojiro. You knew, Haruto said. I suspected, Kojiro replied. When ambition stirs louder than drums, it rarely stays quiet. Fujikawa and Morinaga, if they break away, they'll divide the ranks. They won't just divide them. They'll try to bury you with them. Your ideas threaten their order. Haruto's voice dropped. And if I let them split the army? Kojiro's expression darkened. The Taira will burn Kyoto while the Minamoto devour themselves. Silence fell. Then Haruto spoke, voice low. I'll go to them. Sadanobu burst in moments later, having heard the same rumors from the forward scouts. Fujikawa is leaving tonight with 500 men. Mounted. Armed. They'll claim it's for resupply, but they're heading south. Then we ride now, Haruto said. Before the line is drawn. Dusk bled across the sky as Haruto and his small company, Kojiro, Sadanobu, and 7 loyal riders, moved swiftly down the ridgeline toward the river crossing near Tomonoura. The roads grew narrow, hemmed in by forest and steep drop-offs. They intercepted Fujikawa's procession at the crest of the pass, where red pines bowed toward the sea. Fujikawa sat on a black horse, draped in travel robes but clearly armored beneath. His officers rode tight behind him, eyes wary, hands near sword hilts. "Haruto," Fujikawa said with a cold smile. "Still stalking ghosts, I see. You're walking away from the banner we both swore to protect." "I'm walking away from weakness," Fujikawa replied. "You've infected this army with hesitation. With pity. With delusion. War is not a temple. It is fire. And you are water." "I'm still Minamoto," Haruto said. "But I will not let you drag our name into civil war." Fujikawa's jaw tensed. "And what would you do to stop me? Kill me? So much for mercy." Haruto dismounted. "Let's speak alone." To the shock of both camps, Fujikawa agreed. The two men stepped into the pines, alone but watched. There, beneath the rustling branches, Haruto spoke plainly. "I will not spill your blood if it can be avoided." "Spare me," Fujikawa sneered. "You came to stop me. Do it." "I came to ask for the one thing you've forgotten, choice. Choice is for the weak." "No," Haruto said. "It's the only strength that endures." Fujikawa drew his sword. Haruto didn't move. "Draw, damn you!" Fujikawa shouted. "Stand as a warrior." "I stand as myself," Haruto replied. Fujikawa struck. In one fluid motion, Haruto unsheathed Kage no Tomo and parried. The blades met like thunder. The fight was brutal. Fujikawa was relentless, strength, speed, fury. But Haruto was patient, precise, and steady as stone. Each strike was deflected. Each lunge turned aside. He didn't counterattack. Not once. Finally, Haruto stepped back. "You want me to kill you," he said, breathing hard. "So you can become a martyr." "I won't." Fujikawa screamed and charged. Haruto dropped low, sidestepped, and struck once. Fujikawa stumbled. Blood welled at his side. A clean wound, not fatal. He dropped to his knees, gasping. Haruto sheathed his sword. "You're not dead," he said. "But your rebellion is." From the trees, Sadanobu and Kojiro emerged. Fujikawa's men began to dismount, unsure. Kojiro raised his voice. Fujikawa challenged Haruto. Haruto won. Without death. Without vengeance. A murmur spread. One by one, Fujikawa's men began to kneel, not in loyalty, but in quiet submission to what they had just seen. A battle without hate. A victory without death. That night, as the stars blinked open over the sea, Haruto stood by the fire with Sadanobu. "You spared a man who tried to split the clan," Sadanobu said. "And still, they followed you." "I didn't do it for them," Haruto replied. "I did it because I had to live with it after." Kojiro approached, carrying a jug of sake. "You've done something I've never seen, Haruto." "What?" "You've killed a man's pride without killing the man." But the victory, quiet and bloodless, would echo far louder than any sword clash. For though Fujikawa's rebellion had ended, news of Haruto's growing power, and his refusal to conform, would reach ears far beyond Minamoto borders. In Kyoto, in Terra-held provinces, and among those still undecided, the name Haruto no Kage had begun to shift. From soldier, to symbol. And symbols, in war, are the most dangerous weapons of all. The snow came early that year. It crept down from the northern mountains like a silent messenger, blanketing roads and villages in pale silence. War slowed, but did not stop. Arrows still flew, blood still froze on steel. And through the quiet hills of Izumo, one name rode on every breath of rumor, Haruto no Kage. Word of his stand against Fujikawa had spread faster than the flames of any siege. Some called him the peacemaker of Tomo no Yura, others the ghost of the withered sword. But not all who heard his story believed in mercy. Some believed only in challenge. Haruto first heard of the imitators through a half-frozen courier who stumbled into the Minamoto outpost near Matsue. They wear black cords, the courier wheezed. They strike, only to spare. They call themselves the Blades of the Shadow. Haruto listened quietly. Kojiro sat beside him, brow furrowed. They use your name, the old master said. But not your judgment. Over the next few weeks, more reports followed, a village spared, a skirmish averted, but then a merchant convoy slaughtered in the name of balancing the blade. A samurai hanged for executing prisoners. A captured Taira burned alive for refusing to convert to Haruto's path. This is not my teaching, Haruto said one night, his fists clenched beside the fire. They twist it. Use restraint as weapon. Mercy as theater. Then it is time to take back the voice they've stolen, Kojiro replied. The group called themselves the Mirror Blades. Formed of deserters, radical monks, and disillusioned samurai, they moved like shadows across western provinces, mimicking Haruto's methods but lacking his soul. Their leader was said to be a warrior named Kazenabu, a former monk exiled from Mount High for striking down a fellow brother in a debate over Dharma. He dressed in black, his blade wrapped in white linen. He quoted Haruto's words, twisted into absolutes. A sword that does not kill is a sword that decides who should die slowly. Peace is not the absence of violence, it is the domination of better ideas. When Haruto heard that Kazenabu had taken control of a mountain village and executed the local garrison under a banner bearing the character for Shadow, he stood at once. I will go, he said. Not alone, Kojiro replied. They arrived at the mountain pass leading to the village of Takahara as snow fell thick around them. Haruto, Kojiro, and Sadanobu climbed in silence, their breath pluming before them like mist from a tea kettle. Along the roadside were wooden posts driven into the snow, each one bearing a helmet, marked with blood. At the village gate stood two guards in dark robes with makeshift armor. They raised their naginata, but froze when they saw Haruto. You, one whispered. You're the original. I am Haruto no Kage, he said. And I have come for the one who defiles my name. They let him pass without protest. Inside, the village was silent. Fires burned steadily, but the people stayed indoors. On the temple steps stood Kazenabu. He was taller than Haruto, with a shaved head and long, knotted prayer beads around his neck. His face bore no emotion. You have come, Kazenabu said. I did not summon you. No, Kazenabu said, but your shadow did. Haruto stepped forward. You murder in the name of mercy. You speak of restraint but practice dominance. You call this peace? Kazenabu tilted his head. I merely finish what you began. You opened the door between discipline and doubt. I've walked through. You should thank me. I will not thank a butcher who quotes scripture over corpses. You taught us to carry death without fear. I do so proudly. You carry fear disguised as righteousness. The crowd had gathered now. Villagers. Mirror Blade followers. Even children. All watching. Haruto drew Kage no Tomo slowly. No more false shadows, he said. Kazenabu drew his blade, a long, curved sword with no guard, wrapped in white cloth. I've waited to see which of us reflects the truth. They bowed. Then they struck. The fight was swift and surgical. Kazenabu moved like a storm, powerful, precise, relentless. But Haruto was calm as stone, shifting with every strike, parrying, never overreaching. Steel clashed in echoes through the snowy square. Kuzenobу lunged low. Haruto turned his body, deflected with the flat of his blade, and spun into a rising counter, but stopped just short of Kazenobu's throat. The blade hovered. "I will not kill you," Haruto said. Kazenobu sneered. Still chained to that lie. Haruto turned the blade and struck with the hilt. Kazenobu fell to the snow, alive, unconscious. Haruto looked to the villagers. "No man who speaks in my name shall wield power without compassion. No blade forged in my image shall be raised without restraint." He turned to the mirror blades. "Disband. Or face your own teachings. Not from a scroll, but from steel." Some bowed. Some fled. A few wept. But the spell was broken. Later, Kojiro stood beside Haruto on the ridge. "You looked into the mirror," he said. "I did. And I saw my flaws. But you didn't shatter it." "No," Haruto said. "Only wiped it clean." Snow fell softly around them, the wind carrying no sound but the fading echoes of false disciples. Winter deepened. The war slowed. But beneath the frost-hardened soil, something began to stir, something no warlord or general could anticipate. Hope. In the wake of Haruto's confrontation with Kazenobu and the disbanding of the mirror blades, his legend shifted from myth to movement. No longer was he just a soldier who spared lives, he had become a quiet rebellion unto himself. His actions rippled through villages, monasteries, even enemy lines. Minamoto scouts reported strange occurrences. Taira patrols laying down weapons at village gates and offering trade for food. Disgraced Ronin burying their blades in riverbeds, walking barefoot to shrines. A child's poem written on temple doors. "He walks with death, and so we live, slash the blade that speaks, the hands that give." Kojiro, reading one such scroll by firelight, murmured, "You've become more than a man, Haruto. You've become a reflection of what men wish they had the courage to be." But not all welcomed this. The warlords, both Taira and Minamoto, began to take notice. If their men began to think too much, to question, to doubt the purpose of endless war, then control would slip. And Haruto no Kage had become the crack in the dam. Yorimasa summoned him privately, beneath the frost-covered pines outside the newly reclaimed fortress of Horyu. "You've inspired too many," the old general said, his voice tinged with weariness. "They don't just obey you, they believe you. That makes you dangerous." Haruto bowed. "If belief is more dangerous than obedience, then this war has already failed." Yorimasa smiled sadly. "You sound like my younger self. Before the court sent me to clean the blood they spilled." He stepped closer. "There are those in the capital who want you gone, Haruto. And not just enemies. I've shielded you as long as I can. But the tides are rising. A storm brews behind every silken screen in Kyoto." Haruto nodded. "Then let them come. I will not run from truth." A week later, that truth took the form of a rider cloaked in white, arriving at dusk beneath a sky burning gold. Haruto stood at the gate as the rider dismounted. The figure moved with elegance, wrapped in travel-stained robes of noble dye. She removed her hood. Haruto froze. "Hana," he whispered. It had been 6 years. She was no longer a girl in silk but a woman of quiet steel. The daughter of a Kyoto scholar, once Haruto's childhood companion, she had been sent away to marry a Taira noble after the war began. He had believed her gone, lost to politics and power. Now she stood before him. I bring a message, she said. But not only for your ears. Kojiro, Sadanobu, and several officers gathered in the great hall of the outpost. Hana stood straight, her voice clear. There are factions in the Terra court who have grown disillusioned. They know the war cannot be won through terror. They are ready to speak of peace, but only if you, Haruto, will meet them. Why me? Haruto asked. Because you have done what none of their generals could, she replied. You have reached their men's hearts. Kojiro stepped forward. This is either a trap, or a miracle. Hana turned to him. It may be both. But if we don't seize it, we let the war stretch into another generation. Yoramasa listened in silence. At last, he said, if you go, Haruto, you go without banners. Without command. As a man, not a soldier. Haruto bowed. That is all I've ever been. That night, Haruto and Hana stood beneath a plum tree, its branches bare but proud. You remembered the path, she said. I never forgot it. I thought of you often. Even in the enemy's house. He turned to her. Were you safe? I survived. That is not the same. Their hands brushed, fingers remembering what years had stolen. I don't know if this will work, Haruto said. But if there's even a chance. You must go. Silence. Then she added, softly, and I will go with you. Haruto looked at her, startled. You'd risk that? I've already risked everything. Now I choose who I walk beside. And beneath the frozen stars, the man who walked with death took the first steps toward peace, guided not by banners, nor orders, nor sword. But by the only thing stronger than fear. Memory. Mercy. And love. The journey into Terra territory was a descent into uncertainty. Haruto, Hana, Kojiro, and a small escort of 5 riders moved with no banners and no armor, traveling under the guise of monks and pilgrims. Snow thawed into cold rains as winter turned toward spring. Villages grew quieter the deeper they rode, the faces of peasants guarded, fields untended. The signs of war were everywhere, not in swords drawn, but in absences, homes abandoned, wells dry, children silent. Each night, Haruto studied the terrain. Kojiro prepared escape routes. Hana listened for rumors among travelers and whispered in the tea houses where information moved faster than arrows. They arrived at Kazuryu Pass by moonlight on the 7th night. There, in the valley between 2 cliffs, stood the burned-out husk of an old temple, now converted into a clandestine meeting hall. Terra banners, stripped of ornament, fluttered in the cold wind. The guards who met them wore no clan markings, but their bearing was unmistakable, elite warriors. Hardened. Silent. Inside, the hall was dim, lit by oil lamps. The air smelled of cedar and tension. 3 men waited there, lords of the Terra court's lesser factions. They sat cross-legged on cushions arranged in a triangle. The eldest wore a robe of pale gray and held a fan of black lacquer. I am Lord Fujiwara no Noritsun, he said. These are Lords Akiyama and Munetaka. We speak not with the full voice of the Terra, but with the part of it that remembers what peace once was. Haruto bowed. I come without armor. Without blade drawn. But not without blade, Noritsun replied. Haruto placed Kage no Tomo on the floor beside him, angled respectfully, hand nowhere near the hilt. I bring only words, he said. The Lord studied him for a long time. You have stirred something dangerous, said Akiyama. Your actions have emboldened the weak and troubled the strong. That makes you a threat to both sides. I seek not to embolden, but to awaken, Haruto replied. I do not want your surrender. Only your willingness to imagine an end that isn't built on ashes. Munetaka's eyes narrowed. Words do not win wars. No, Haruto said, but they stop the ones that have no victory. There was silence. Then Noritsun spoke again, softer. Some among the Taira are tired. They would accept talks. But not all. And not without proof that your own commanders will do the same. I will bring that proof, Haruto said. You'll need to move quickly, Noritsun said. There are others who do not believe in talk. At that, Kojiro tensed. What do you mean? He asked. Hana answered instead. We were followed. She turned her head slightly. 3 riders. They passed us outside Fukuyama. One stayed behind. I think he is here. Haruto's hand went to his sword. The lamps flickered. A shadow shifted near the temple's entrance. Then a blade flashed. Haruto stood in a breath. Steel sang. The assassin rushed forward, masked and quick, blade aimed not for Haruto, but for Noritsun. Haruto moved between them. Their blades met in a scream of sparks. The assassin hissed through his mask. Peace is a lie. They clashed again, fierce and fast. Haruto fought defensively, guiding the killer's blade away from the lord's, each movement tight and controlled. The assassin lunged low. Haruto caught the blow with the back of his blade and spun, disarming him in a single movement. The man stumbled. Haruto pressed the edge of Kageno Tomo to his throat. Who sent you? Haruto demanded. The man stared with hate-filled eyes. You think you can unmake the wheel? You think mercy will survive ambition? Haruto stepped back. Then kill me, the assassin spat. I won't, Haruto said. You don't deserve my sword. The man snarled, but the Taira guards had already moved in to restrain him. Noritsun stood, shaken but composed. You've made your point, he said to Haruto. You guard even those who deny your message. I guard the chance for peace, Haruto replied. No matter how many try to kill it. Noritsun bowed low. Then you will have our letters. We will send word to your Yorimasa. A parley. Neutral ground. Akiyama and Munetaka exchanged glances, then nodded. Haruto exhaled. Then we begin. That night, as the campfire crackled in the woods outside the temple ruins, Haruto sat beside Hana. You saved a man who might still be your enemy, she said. Not because I trust him. But because the only thing worse than betrayal is silence. She laid her hand on his. You've done more with restraint than others have done with armies. Haruto looked up at the stars. Then let restraint be my sword. Far to the west, behind layers of paper walls and silken veils, spies whispered of the meeting. One lord in Kyoto, hearing of Haruto's actions, smiled faintly and dipped his brush in ink. The boy sharpens the wind itself. Let us see if he can cut through history. When Haruto returned to Minamoto command, spring had already begun to crack the frost. Buds hung on skeletal branches, and distant fields shimmered with the first green shoots. But within the walls of Fort Nagashima, the air was colder than it had been all winter. The garrison had doubled. Tensions ran high. New recruits patrolled with nervous energy, and veteran warriors sharpened their blades like they expected betrayal in every shadow. It was not the anticipation of battle, but of civil unraveling. Haruto dismounted slowly, Hana at his side, their cloaks heavy with road dust. Kojiro and Sadanobu followed behind. At the gates, the sentries didn't bow. They simply stared. Report to General Yorimasa, one muttered. He's waiting. Haruto nodded. And Fujikawa? The guard shifted. He returned. With fewer men. He's been quiet. Too quiet. Inside the central keep, Uramasa rose from his place beside the brazier as Haruto entered. He looked older. More fragile. As if the smoke of war had begun to seep into his very bones. Did they receive you? Uramasa asked at once. They did, Haruto said. Noritsune. Akiyama. Munetaka. They offer dialogue. They await your answer. And the cost? No surrender. Only ceasefire. Neutral ground. You will speak as equals. Uramasa sat, slowly. His hand trembled as he poured tea. The court will not approve. Then don't ask them. I may not have that luxury, Uramasa said quietly. The other generals, some suspect treason. Others think you act in secret. I act in light, Haruto said. And in that light, a new voice growled, you cast very long shadows. Fujikawa stepped into the chamber, flanked by 2 officers. His expression was unreadable. You return with talk of peace. And yet our soldiers die daily. I return with a chance to stop that dying, Haruto said. One you nearly cost us. Fujikawa smirked. And you would have us believe the Terra seek peace? That they suddenly found their conscience? They found the cost of endless war, Haruto replied. Even wolves stop when the forest is empty. Fujikawa approached. Tell me, Haruto, how many more honorable exceptions will you make before the blade slips? Haruto said nothing. Kojiro, standing to the side, spoke up. You fear his influence more than his mistakes. That's the root of this. Uramasa raised a hand. Enough. He looked to Haruto. You believe this path leads somewhere. A place beyond death. Beyond vengeance. I don't just believe, Haruto said. I see it. In the men who have already followed. On both sides. Uramasa gave a long, slow nod. Then I will meet the Terra. In the valley of Yatsuhara. 3 weeks hence. You will guide the negotiation. But if it fails. I know. That night, Haruto walked the camp alone. Whispers followed him. He should wear white, not armor. Traitor's blade looks clean. He spares too many to be trusted. He found his way to the cliff above the river, a place where he once trained under stars with Kojiro in younger years. Hana joined him, wrapping a warm shawl around his shoulders. You carry a heavy silence, she said. They do not want peace. Not yet. They want victory. They don't see that they've already lost everything that made the fight worth waging. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Then give them something to believe in. I can't be everything. No, she whispered, but you've become the measure of what they lack. Let them wrestle with it. But in the quiet hours before dawn, a letter arrived at Fort Nagashima, sealed in silk, perfumed faintly with camellia. Uramasa read it. Then burned it. He summoned Kojiro. The court sends a replacement, he said. A lord's son. Young. Popular. Dangerous. Does he come to observe? Kojiro asked. Uramasa's eyes narrowed. No. He comes to remove obstacles. Kojiro exhaled. He comes for Haruto. As the embers of war smoldered, and peace took its first fragile breath, a dagger glinted unseen in the folds of diplomacy. Haruto had built a bridge. Now others would try to burn it from both ends. The valley of Yatsuhara lay quiet, carved between ancient hills like a bowl left by the gods. Soft winds stirred the first spring blossoms, and wild plum trees dotted the ridgelines in timid pink. It had once been a site of pilgrimage, a place where monks whispered sutras for fallen ancestors. Now it was to host the first meeting of peace between the Minamoto and the Taira in nearly 3 decades. But the valley was not empty. For every step toward peace, a knife moved in silence. Haruto led the delegation. He wore no armor, only his travel robes and a black sash over his shoulder, the mark of a warrior without clan rank, without lordship, who carried his own code. Beside him rode Kojiro, his master and shadow, and Sadanobu, loyal and unbending. Hana followed in a litter, cloaked and veiled, disguised as a scribe. Across the clearing, the Taira emerged. Lord Noritsun bowed with grace. Lords Akiyama and Munetaka behind him, faces drawn but resolved. They, too, came without troops. Only ceremonial guards. Their banners bore no emblems, just simple white cloth fluttering in the wind. They bowed to Haruto. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," Noritsun said. "Then let's ensure it's not the last," Haruto replied. The two delegations met at the center of the glade, where a low platform had been built beneath a flowering tree. The scent of old wood and fresh petals filled the air. "Before the quills are sharpened," said Akiyama, "we must ask the question, does the Minamoto speak with one voice?" Haruto turned. Yorimasa had not yet arrived. But someone else had. A young man, perhaps 25, rode forward on a white horse. He wore silver armor and carried a fan instead of a sword. His hair was tied in a courtly topknot. His attendants wore red and black. And his banner bore the crescent emblem of the Kyoto court. He dismounted, his face a practiced mask of politeness. "I am Lord Ashikaga Tamanari, envoy of the imperial regent, second cousin to the northern chancellor. I come with authority." Haruto's chest tightened. This was the replacement. The political blade wrapped in silk. Kojiro whispered behind him, "He's not here to observe. He's here to poison." Tamanari bowed shallowly to the Taira lords. "You risk much to meet here. It would be a shame if the moment were compromised." Haruto stepped forward. Lord Yorimasa granted authority for this meeting. The court was not summoned. Tamanari smiled. "Lord Yorimasa lies on a futon this very hour, struck with sudden illness. He sends his regrets." Sadanobu's grip tightened on his sword. "Poison. Quiet. Political." Kojiro's voice was low. "This is the hand of the inner court. They fear what you represent." Haruto turned back to the Taira lords. "I will speak for the Minamoto," he said. "If we agree on terms today, I will bring them before the council myself." "And if they reject them?" Munetaka asked. "Then they reject a path that may never open again." The peace talks began. Noritsun proposed a ceasefire line, a mutual withdrawal from contested provinces, and a shared tribunal for war crimes. Haruto agreed. Kojiro took notes. Hana translated with soft precision. But through it all, Lord Tamanari watched. He made no proposals, only smiled and listened. Until, near dusk, he spoke. "I have a proposal," he said lightly. "To seal this pact with honor and blood. Let the two sides join their names in marriage." The valley went still. "I speak," Tamanari said, "of Haruto no Kage, whose name we all know, and Lady Hana of the Taira, once wed by arrangement to a fallen Taira lord, now free of bond. Let them marry, here and now, as a symbol of union." Haruto turned to Hana. Her face was pale, eyes unreadable. It's a trap, Kojiro whispered. If you agree, they'll say you betrayed both clans. If you refuse, they'll claim the peace was never honest. Tamanari smiled like a fox behind rice paper. Haruto stepped forward. I would marry her not for war, nor for peace, but for who she is. I would do it if no banners flew and no armies watched. Tamanari raised an eyebrow. A touching sentiment. But not here, Haruto added. Not now. Not with knives at our backs. He turned to Noritsun. You came for peace. Not theater. Noritsun gave the slightest nod. Then. A scream. From the ridgeline came a flurry of black shapes. Arrows hissed through the air. One of the Terra guards fell, blood spreading on the grass. Ambush. Haruto moved in an instant, shielding Hana, shouting to Kojiro and Sadanobu. The mirror blades? No, these men were dressed like peasants, but fought like assassins. One lunged toward Noritsun. Haruto intercepted, cutting low, swift, clean. The peace summit erupted into chaos. Kojiro drew steel, cutting down too. Sadanobu held the line. Hana ducked behind the stone table, shielded by an overturned banner. Lord Tamanari stood unmoved. He folded his fan. Let it burn, he murmured. And slipped into the woods, his role complete. Haruto fought until the attackers were dead or fled. Then silence returned to the valley, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the soft sigh of petals falling. Peace had been within reach. And now it lay bleeding on the grass. That night, Kojiro found Haruto alone by the stream, washing blood from his hands. You held the dream, the master said softly. I failed it, Haruto whispered. No. You revealed it. Behind them, Hana knelt beside the wounded Noritsun, bandaging his arm. The Terra Lord nodded to her, then to Haruto. Do not let them steal this from you, Kojiro said. Not the court. Not the killers. Not the silence. Haruto looked up. I won't. But in his eyes was something new, not despair, not defeat. But the cold, bitter clarity of a man who had seen the world offered peace. And watched it choke. The valley of Yatsuhara smoldered behind them. By morning, the wounded were being carried out on makeshift stretchers. Lord Noritsun, pale but standing, swore an oath to send word back to his faction. I will not let this massacre erase our promise, he told Haruto. But my hands will be tied once I return. The court, they will see only betrayal. Haruto bowed low. Then let me speak in your place. Noritsun grasped his forearm. You have until the summer rains. After that, the Terra will be forced to act. With that, he and his retinue vanished into the eastern forest. No banners. No drums. Only the faint trail of hoofbeats fading toward Kyoto. The Minamoto offered no such oath. Lord Tamanari had disappeared with the chaos, no doubt already drafting letters to court ministers and high-born spies. His fan would unfold in palace halls with lies pressed between each rib. Back at Fort Nagashima, Haruto's name would already be whispered not as peacebringer, but traitor. He would not return. Haruto stood beneath a pine tree at dusk, Kojiro and Hana beside him. I cannot carry this banner anymore, he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. It's no longer a symbol of justice, only power. Kojiro's face was unreadable. You're leaving the Minamoto. I never served their greed. I followed Yoramesa, and he is dying, if not dead already. The rest. I do not know them. You'll be hunted, Kojiro said. By both sides. I know. Sadanabu stepped out of the shadows, arms crossed. "And where will you go?" "Everywhere the war hasn't touched," Haruto replied. "To villages. Hidden valleys. Pilgrims and monks. Ronin and servants. I'll build a new path, one not shaped by clan." Hana's voice was soft. "A third banner." Haruto nodded. "A banner not of lineage, but of choice." Kojiro was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then I will walk beside you." "As will I," said Hana. And, after a pause, Sadanabu added, "Someone has to make sure you don't die trying to do the impossible." Haruto smiled. They burned his Minamoto sash that night, no ceremony, only fire and wind. The flames crackled like the ghosts of 100 commands he would never follow again. In the weeks that followed, the four traveled without heralds or purpose beyond listening. In a ruined province, they found an old healer sheltering orphans in an abandoned kiln. Haruto helped them build a wooden fence, sharpen tools for farming. In a river village still loyal to the Taira, he sat with the elders and listened to the story of a samurai who had drowned himself rather than kill a friend. In the mountains of Kumano, they met two brothers who had fled a warlord's press gang. Haruto trained them, not in killing, but in patience, stillness, and watching the wind. And as they moved, word spread. There is a man who carries no banner. He fights only when he must. He teaches warriors to plant before they strike. He bears a black sash, and a sword that remembers. They came in 2s and 3s at first. Veterans with haunted eyes. Farmers whose sons had died for promises never kept. Temple acolytes who had cast aside prayer beads for the sound of truth. Kojiro carved a new mon for them, a circle, cracked on one side, mended by a single thread. The emblem of those broken by war, yet still holding together. And they called themselves the Silent Crescent. One night, in a birch grove lit by fireflies, Haruto stood before his new followers, now 50 strong, maybe more. He wore no armor. His sword rested across his knees. "I did not gather you for rebellion," he said. "Nor for conquest. We will not fight unless others draw blades first. And even then, we fight without hatred. Without cruelty. We fight to show that peace is not weakness. That restraint is strength. That mercy is not the absence of courage, but its highest form. Others will call us cowards," he continued. "They will say we abandon duty. That we betray history." He looked out over the grove. Faces lit by fire. Some smiling. Some crying. Let them. He drew Kage no Tomo and held it aloft. The blade reflected only the stars. "This sword remembers every life it has spared. Every time it refused to end a story. If you would walk this path with me, know this, it is harder than war. But it is ours." Silence. Then, one by one, those gathered stood and placed their blades in the ground before them, not to bury, but to honor. Kojiro stepped beside Haruto. "You've given them something more than peace," he said. "What?" "A way to live." By the turn of the season, the Silent Crescent had grown from a whisper into a wave. It was no army, but it moved like one. Villages once forgotten were now protected by men and women who bore no clan mon, only the mended circle. Their blades stayed sheathed unless absolutely necessary, but their presence alone began to shift the balance. Bandits withdrew. Draft collectors were turned away. Even some warlords, uncertain of how to face warriors who would not bow but also would not strike first, chose retreat over escalation. And still the rumors spread. The Crescent has appeared in Dua. A Taira garrison defected after a single conversation with Haruto. Minamoto lords burn their own flags in shame. It could not last. Not without consequence. The Terra court, enraged by desertions and the shame of Noritsun's peace talks, branded Haruto a traitor to order. They placed a bounty on his head, 200 gold coins and the right to claim a seat among the Kyoto elite. The Minamoto did worse. They sent a sword. Not an assassin, but a message. One man, armored in black and crimson, rode to the edge of the crescent's territory and left a challenge pinned to a dead tree, its bark still wet with blood. It was written in delicate brushwork, formal, composed. Haruto no Kage. You once spared a life. You now betray the dead who carried you here. Face me at the hill of Nagamine. Alone. Or your crescent will burn from the inside out. By the hand of Yoriaki. Haruto read the name, and his grip loosened. Yoriaki. A name from another life. Years ago, before the war hardened the world, Yoriaki had been Haruto's closest companion at Kojiro's dojo. They had sparred together, studied together, laughed under the same cherry tree. Yoriaki had been bold, brash, fiercely loyal to the Minamoto cause. But as Haruto's path bent toward restraint and doubt, Yoriaki's bent toward vengeance. The last time they saw each other, it had been at Masanori's funeral. Yoriaki had offered him a place in a rising faction. You belong with us, Haruto, he had said. You can't survive between banners. I don't want to survive, Haruto had replied. I want to change what survival means. Now Yoriaki had returned, not as a brother, but as a blade. Kojiro said nothing when Haruto showed him the letter. But that night, by the fire, he finally asked, "Will you go?" "I must," Haruto said. "Alone?" "Yes." "If he kills you," Kojiro said, "he will do it not out of hatred, but to prove that your path ends in weakness." Haruto looked at his hands. "Then I must prove him wrong, even if I fall." Hana pressed a bundle of dried cloth into his hand before he left. "What is it?" he asked. "A sash," she said. "For the one who walks between two worlds. So neither can claim you." Nagamine Hill stood solitary, crowned with wind-beaten pine and tall brown grass. The leaves had begun to fall in spirals, painting the earth in rust and gold. Yoriaki was already there, sharpening his blade. He stood as Haruto approached. "I told you once," Yoriaki said, "that hesitation would kill you." "And I told you once," Haruto replied, "that we must learn to live with the weight of our blade, not the blood on it." Yoriaki unsheathed his sword, a blade Haruto recognized from their youth, now blackened by flame. "Today we finished the lesson," Yoriaki said. "No disciples. No warlords. Just us." Haruto bowed. Then they fought. It was a duel not of fury, but of memory. Each blow remembered a shared kata. Each parry echoed an old sparring match. They circled like ghosts of themselves, like brothers torn apart by the silence between two philosophies. Yoriaki struck hard, low, with the power of a man trying to end a story. Haruto countered, fluid, defensive, never lunging to kill. "Why won't you strike?" Yoriaki roared. "Because I still see the boy who laughed beneath the cherry tree," Haruto said. Yoriaki surged forward, but faltered. Haruto stepped in, disarmed him in a sudden, beautiful motion, and brought Kage no Tomo to rest lightly against his former friend's throat. Yoriaki froze. Then dropped to his knees. Haruto stepped back and sheathed his sword. "You win," Yoriaki spat. "But you've doomed yourself. The court will not stop. The warlords will come. You'll be crushed by the weight of your ideals." "I'd rather be crushed," Haruto said, than lose the shape of what I believe. Silence. Then Yoriaki whispered, "You spared me again." "No," Haruto said. "I spared the memory of what we once were." Haruto returned to his camp as the sun dipped behind the mountain. Yoriaki did not follow. But he did not strike again. Kojiro met him in silence. Sadanobu asked no questions. And Hana, wrapping his hand in warm cloth, said only, "You walk to the edge of death again." Haruto looked to the stars. "And still, death walks beside me. Patient. Silent. Waiting. But not today." "No," Haruto said. "Not today." The summons came with spring's first thunder. A formal message, carried by a monk who rode alone for days, arrived at the Crescent encampment. The parchment bore 3 seals, Taira, Minamoto, and the imperial court. Haruto no Kage. You are called to the summit at Hojoji Shrine. One voice must now speak for all who have turned from banners. Refuse, and your movement will be buried beneath the next tide of blood. Kojiro read the words aloud. Silence followed. Hana looked up from the map she'd been marking. "It's a trap." "Not entirely," Kojiro said. "If they truly wanted him dead, they'd send arrows, not invitations." Sadanobu leaned forward. "It's not about killing him. It's about forcing him to kneel. If he bends, the crescent breaks." Haruto stood, folding the scroll. "Then I won't bend. But I will go." Kojiro studied him. "What will you say when 3 courts ask you to choose a side?" Haruto met his gaze. "I'll remind them there is a 4th. The summit at Hojoji was unlike any gathering since the war began. The shrine sat on a lake island, surrounded by blooming lotus and still water so clear it mirrored the sky. Each faction brought only 5 retainers. Weapons were left at the causeway gate. There were no guards inside. Only silence. The Minamoto were represented by Lord Tamanari, seated in white, smug as a magistrate. The Taira arrived next, Lord Munetaka, gaunt and grim. He bore scars from the Yatsuhara ambush and held his prayer beads with both hands. And last, from Kyoto, came Court Minister Fujiwara no Atsumoto, dressed in gold thread and silk so thin it fluttered with every breath. His voice was like honey over stone. "We are here to settle what cannot be settled by steel," he said. "To determine if the realm can survive ideas sharper than swords." Then Haruto entered. He walked barefoot across the red bridge, robed in black, a single thread of white cord tied around his sleeve, the mark of the silent crescent. At his side was Kage no Tomo, bound in cloth and silence. He bowed to no one. Tamanari broke first. "You divide the people. Undermine oaths. Refuse the call of war, yet still claim the mantle of warrior." Haruto looked at him. "A warrior is not the one who kills. He is the one who chooses when not to." Munetaka spoke next. "And what of justice? Will mercy replace law? Will discipline dissolve into compromise? Justice without compassion is tyranny dressed in armor," Haruto replied. Finally, Minister Atsumoto leaned forward. "Then tell us, Haruto no Kage, what is your final path? If not the sword for the throne, or the sword for the land, what then?" Haruto stepped into the center of the shrine. He spoke not with volume, but with stillness. There was once a boy who watched his father die for a cause he barely understood. He trained under a master who taught him that death is not the enemy, but the mirror. I have carried that mirror. Through blood. Through mercy. Through betrayal and silence. I stand now not for peace that begs, nor war that consumes, but for a path where the sword is not held to kill or to kneel, but to remember. A sword that walks beside death, but does not feed it. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping across all three powers. You ask me to kneel to one banner. I say no. I say the people do not belong to banners. The soil does not bleed red or white. The sky does not change for one general or another. And neither will I. He drew Kage no Tomo, not in threat, but in reverence. He drove it into the wooden floor of the shrine. This blade will not rise again to serve ambition. And with that, he stepped away, leaving it behind. Silence fell like snowfall. No one moved. Even Tamanari, lips poised to object, said nothing. Fujiwara no Atsumoto finally stood. In refusing to choose a master, you have become one. But you will not rule, will you? Haruto shook his head. I lead no empire. Only a path. The minister gave a quiet smile. Then let it be written. Let it be remembered. Haruto left the shrine at dusk. Kojiro waited by the bridge. They won't follow, the master said. I didn't ask them to, Haruto replied. Then what now? Haruto looked toward the mountains. We return to the people. There's rice to plant. Villages to rebuild. Wounds to close. Kojiro smirked. And if war returns? Haruto touched the hilt of a new sword, plain, wooden, carved from the tree under which his father was buried. Then we walk with it. Not to fight, but to steady the hand of those who might. Hana joined them, her hand in his. Sadanobu brought the horses. And behind them, at the bridge, the empty sword stood gleaming in the sunset, reflecting a future yet unwritten. Centuries later, poets would write of Haruto no Kage, not as a warlord, nor a killer, but as the man who gave death a name and refused to fear it. Temples bore his teachings. Fields flourished where his crescent once camped. And the mended circle, his symbol, was carved above shrines where warriors wept, not for victory, but for the lives they spared. Why did the samurai carry death? Because in the shadow of death, they found their truest selves. And in the hand that refused to kill, they found the path that could not be broken.